Good day, mate. Today, we're popping over to Australia to learn about a lesser-known war. It's a war that, by common consensus, the good old boys of the Aussie military decisively lost. And, interestingly, it's a war that was waged not against another country, but against Australia's own national bird. This is the story of the time the nation famous for unflinchingly dealing with giant spiders, poisonous snakes, belligerent kangaroos, and whatever this thing is, went to war against oversized, long-legged chickens, and lost. This is the story of the 1932 Emu War. How were things going for Australia in 1932? Well, not brilliantly, to be honest. The Great Depression was in full swing at the time, and it was a global crisis. What had started with a stock market crash and an economic downturn in America had spread around the world when President Herbert Hoover instigated the funny-sounding Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which turned out to not be very funny at all. The act made it very expensive to import goods, with the intention of encouraging homegrown industry and incentivizing people to buy stuff that was made in America. Unfortunately, pretty much every other country in the world didn't like being tariffed to within an nth of their life, and so enacted tariffs of their own. International buying and selling took a nosedive all over the world, and the Depression was officially a global one. Long story short, just like everywhere else, Australia was in an economic funk in 1932. This funk hit every industry hard, but it hit farmers the hardest. Here were people trying to grow actual food out of the actual ground, which is hard enough at the best of times, and even harder when you have nobody to sell the resultant produce to, and presumably have to eat it all yourself. Or let it linger in the fields unharvested, which is what many farmers did that year. Even worse, many farmers had actually been told to increase their wheat production by the government, ostensibly as a way of tackling the dire economic situation. The government had, in the same breath, totally promised some tasty subsidies to the farmers for doing so. But, like that friend who borrows a tenner off you and never returns it, once the farmers had upped their wheat production, the government claimed it just didn't have the cash to hand and would totally pay them next time it saw them, but then never did. Now you have a situation. There's a huge amount of wheat just sitting there waiting to be eaten, plus lots of land that had been cleared ready for planting yet more wheat. Australia's government and Australia's many farmers had inadvertently created a utopian paradise for emus. Emus, by the way, are large flightless birds with long necks and long legs. They're a bit like flamingos, but bushier and dustier, and a bit like ostriches, but bigger and meaner. British entertainer Rob Hull famously attacked Johnny Carson with a puppet of one during an appearance on The Tonight Show in 1983, despite previously having agreed not to. In that case, it was a puppet doing the pecking, but emus are big and pointy and formidable, and will totally have a go at you if you try to interview them. Having tens of thousands of them hone in on your lovely golden wheat fields is no joke. But that's exactly the situation that farmers in Western Australia found themselves in October 1932. Nearly 20,000 of the birds migrated into their patch and started going absolutely ham on the unharvested crops. They ate, they trampled, they pooped, and then they moved on to do the exact same thing at the next farm over. On the way, they wrecked the fences protecting the fields, allowing thousands of rabbits to sneak in and finish off any tiny scraps of crop that were left. As if the greatest economic depression the world had seen wasn't bad enough, now giant birds were eating all the food. Aussie farmers were, as the Australians say, fair dinkum spewing. They turned to the government for help. The Minister for Agriculture had just headed out to the shops for a Tim Tam and some twisties that day though, so instead of their usual point of contact, they went straight to the Minister for Defence and asked if they could have some machine guns to fight off the birds. Bit of context here. Many farmers in Western Australia had been soldiers during the First World War. When the conflict ceased, they needed something else to do, and the government encouraged them to take up farming and cultivate marginal land in Western Oz. Many ex-soldiers were given plots of land, in many cases land that wasn't really the government's to give, in exchange for their service. It was a way of recognising veterans, looking like they were really generous, and also upping Australia's food production into the bargain. This land was uncultivated and in some cases not ideally suited for farming. So forget any visions of retiring for a peaceful life on an idyllic farmstead after the war. For most farmers, taking on land was hard work, made all the harder when the government totally promised that they would help them out with a little bit of hard cash the next time they hung out, then ghosted them. The point is, the farmers were well within their rights to ask for help, the government couldn't really say no to its loyal veterans, and many farmers were somewhat military-minded to begin with. Thus, the farmers asked for machine guns, and machine guns they got. A grand total of 2 of them. Given Australia's sheer size, that might not seem like much, but supplemented with 10,000 rounds of ammunition, it was believed that it would be enough to seriously thin out the invading emu population. The birds should be easy targets, it was thought. Those 10,000 rounds should easily yield at least 1,000 dead emus. The Minister for Defence even suggested that they bring back 100 or so skins to be made into lovely hats for the nation's cavalry. I'll just take a moment to suggest here that maybe, just maybe, this was a bit of a publicity stunt. It would look good for the government to be doing something for the veterans, and sending 2 guys with machine guns to defend the entirety of Western Australia against a plague of emus was certainly cheaper than paying out the subsidies they'd promised farmers for their crops. To add to the publicity stunt theory, there's also the fact that they sent along a film crew, who captured in agonizing detail the debacle that followed. You're on this channel, so you already know it didn't go particularly well. Here's the overview. Major Gwynedd, Purves, Wyn Aubrey Meredith, and 2 dudes with machine guns, and a film crew, ride out west in trucks, spot some emus, and open fire while they're still far too far away. The birds do what birds do, and scatter. They kill almost no emus. The day's a write-off. Undaunted, they herd together nearly 1,000 of the enemy, force them to bunch up together, creep up close, and start blasting. Both guns jam almost instantly, and the birds scatter. They kill almost no emus. The day's a write-off. They carry on, but the birds start organising against them. Now, it seems to the increasingly frazzled soldiers, there's always at least one bird on lookout. The biggest of the birds keeps watch and raises the alarm as soon as they get anywhere near, causing the birds to, you guessed it, scatter. Day after day, they kill almost no emus. Day after day, the day's a write-off. New tactics are called for. So the Major orders 1 machine gun to be mounted on the back of a truck so that they can chase down the birds and shoot them on the wing. It turns out, however, that trying to shoot a moving emu with a juddery vintage Thompson gun from the back of a jeep bouncing and rattling over an unpaved road is about as difficult as you would expect trying to shoot a moving emu with a juddery vintage Thompson gun from the back of a jeep bouncing and rattling over an unpaved road to be. They kill almost no emus. The day's a write-off. Actually, so is the truck. They barely shoot any birds, but one unlucky emu gets run over, caught in the wheels, and causes the jeep to crash into a ditch. The soldiers now have to face the prospect of heading home and reporting in that they took actual losses while fighting, literally, just some big squawky birds. A tough day at the office. On the 8th of November, the task force withdrew, defeated. Major Meredith was sporting about it, or at least he felt the need to really big up the emus to minimise the sheer scale of their defeat. He complimented the birds on both their manoeuvrability and their bullet-carrying capacity. By that, he implied that a single shot from a machine gun was not enough to fell your average emu. Now, I'm no ornithologist, but in canon I am a literal bird, so I feel qualified to comment here. I think that's nonsense. I think the guys were just missing the emus with most of their shots. Anywho, it was an embarrassing retreat for the Aussie army that prompted opposition politicians to joke that they ought to award medals to the emus. That kind of jibe couldn't be allowed to stand, and so Major Meredith suited up and headed out for round 2 in November 1932. This time things went a little bit better, although given how poorly they'd gone the first time, it was difficult to imagine them going worse. They stayed in the field for about a month, and during that time, by their own estimate, managed to cull around 986 emus. I say by their own estimate because absolutely nobody believes that. Let's be generous though, and say that they offed around 1,000, Given that there were about 20 times that number flooding into the region, it's debatable whether the war against the emus was won. The cull probably helped, but it definitely didn't help nearly as much as the solutions they tried in other years. In 1934, for example, the government simply offered a small bounty for each emu killed by the farmers themselves, and within short order had racked up a much more respectable 50,000 kills. Not long after that, fencing technology improved and culls became, thankfully, unnecessary. The year when Australia pitted their finest against a bunch of flightless birds and lost became a bizarre footnote in history. The world media had a field day when they found out about it, with the British press complaining about the extermination of the rare emu, an indication perhaps of just how incomprehensible the wildlife of Australia is to the average Brit. Nowadays, when it is necessary to cull an animal to sustain an ecological balance, we tend to do it in a rather less bombastic and hopefully much more humane way. Nobody likes a cull, and especially so when you attempt it with a minigun. As the Emu War of 1932 shows, quite apart from being absolutely off your rocker, sending in the troops against nature just doesn't actually work. A few little side notes. There have been several attempts to give the Emu War the Hollywood treatment, all of which have basically flopped. This low-budget Australian version has its moments, but also, bizarrely, gives the emus guns, thus abjectly failing to get what was funny about the original debacle, that the might of the Australian army was defeated by a bargain bucket's worth of avians. John Cleese is allegedly slated to appear in another, newer, better film version, but it has yet to see the light of day. I'm poised with the popcorn in case it ever does reach screens, though. Australia continues to be absolutely bonkers. They mostly leave emus alone now, where they live in peace alongside the giant snakes, bird-eating spiders, dive-bombing magpies, and whatever other horrors nature has in store. Emus are mostly peaceful creatures whose diet mainly consists of plant matter, insects, and seeds. But they will totally have a go at you with their extra pointy beak if you ever do cross them. Perhaps some of them still remember the Great Emu War of 1932.